Our next material is wood for this vintage chair, and the model is roughly based on this reference photo, but I'm gonna go for a slightly different material for the wood parts. And the one I'm thinking of is something more like this, where you have your wood and 2 layers of paint on top of that. You can sort of see it has been painted red first and then painted yellow. And you can see how these 3 layers transition from one to another. Okay, so let's write down the layers we need to create. So we have our wood, we have our paint 1, and we have our paint 2. And if you look at the reference photo, you will see that most of the wear is happening along the edges. Along the edges of drawers, along the edges of the cupboard. So probably something similar will need to be implemented for this chair as well. I'm gonna hide the leather for now. We're gonna look at that in the next video, but now let's zoom in on the wood. Okay, so this is my wood texture. It's basic tileable wood. I'm gonna start by creating the first layer first, and that's gonna be the wood. So let's create a new bitmap in the diffuse slot and use that wood material. Okay, and I'm just gonna rotate it 90 degrees so I don't have to mess with the UVs. Right now the grain direction is correct, and the tiling looks a bit too small if you zoom in. So let's reduce the tiling value to 0.5 or even less. Let's try 0.25, and that's more like it. The size seems okay now. Okay, so let's render and see how it looks. It's a bit dark. I'm gonna turn up one of my lights. And re-render. Okay. I think the texture is a bit too saturated for what we're going for. If you look at the reference, the wood is pretty dull, and there's not a lot of color to it. And this is an even better example where the wood is almost beige or white below the lacquer. So basically I'm gonna make it a bit brighter, lighter, and a bit less saturated. So something like that maybe. So your basic unfinished wood looks like some walnut in this case. Alright, and okay, it's still saving. And there we go. That looks better. I'm gonna reduce the blur to 0.2 maybe. And let's go ahead and create a reflection map for it. I'm just gonna drag it to my reflect map, to my reflection glossiness, and to my bump. And I'm gonna adjust this bitmap by using the color correct map. Okay, color correction in the reflect slot. This is how it looks now. Let's reduce the saturation to 0 and bring up the contrast a little bit. And make it a bit brighter. So the reflections seem alright. I'm gonna enable Fresnel and set it at something like 4 and move on to the glossiness. Okay, so that's going to be another color correction. and reduce the saturation and bring up the brightness. So something like this looks fine. Let's zoom in and adjust the contrast a little bit. Okay, that's fine. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that bump map here and use my reflect map in the bump slot as well. Alright, and let's just set that map to something like 50. Let's test it out. Maybe a bit too rough. Okay, back to 30. And that seems fine. I'm gonna increase my preview render size a bit so we can see better. Alright, that's nice. Okay, so that's our basic unfinished walnut layer. I'm thinking it's a bit too dark, so I'm gonna bring up the lightness just a little bit. Actually, I can do that with a color correct map. Alright, like that. And in this case it's a bit better to use a color correction map instead of adjusting the source image, because if I adjust the source image I would have to readjust my reflection and my glossiness maps, because they would change as well. Alright, so that's the first layer, the wood. Let's look at the next layer, which is paint. Basically pretty rough looking, but the diffuse is pretty even with some tiny splotches or smudges and some dirt in these inner corner areas. So let's start with the Vray material, and let's set up the diffuse map first. I'm going to use a composite map here. And in my composite map I'm going to start with a mix map. And I'm going to mix together two colors, so my base color is going to be, let's say we're going to use something similar to this yellow. Alright, that's good. And add some darker brownish spots or smudges with the second color here. And we're going to mix them together with the bitmap. So perhaps something like Dirt 11 will work. And just swap them around. Okay. Let's make those darks for this bitmap a bit lighter by adjusting the RGB level. Alright, and let's preview it in the viewport. It's not bad, but I think those dark colors are a bit too strong. So I'm just gonna run a color correct right here. And bring up the brightness. And you can see those spots becoming weaker. Okay, that's not bad. Now let's add some dirt from for these inner corners by using some V-Ray dirt with a V-Ray color map. So the V-Ray color map is going to be some darkish gray-brown color like this, and the mask is going to be V-Ray dirt. And again, swap the colors around. And let's preview it with our text map preview. Okay, that's not bad. Maybe let's reduce it a bit and increase the fall-off value a bit. Okay, that's better. Okay, excellent. So I'm pretty happy with the overall look, and I just want to add something to the radius. So for example, let's add our dirt 18. Alright, and there we go. Let's see how the composite map looks. I think we can make the dirt a bit stronger. And again, I'm just gonna quickly copy it, go in and paste in the unoccluded color slot. So now we have our dirt, our little splotches, and now we can move on to the reflections. Okay, there's a diffuse. And for reflections, we can use a simple bitmap. And I'm gonna go with my dirt 3. Let's see that on the model. Looks about right. Turn on Fresnel, set it maybe 4. Blur the reflections a bit. And I think the reflections are too strong, so I'm just gonna go and bring down that reflection value to 50%. Or even 30. Not bad. Very dull looking sheen. That's fine. And for reflection glossiness, again, I'm going to use my one of my maps, and let's say we're going to use dirt 9. And just set it at something pretty low, like maybe 8. Just to give a hint of that imperfection in the glossiness. Okay, maybe 8 is a bit low. Let's try 20. I think that looks good. So I'm pretty happy with my glossiness. I just want to make the reflections a bit weaker. And we can set up some bump. For example, let's use some sort of a scratch map. And let's see how it looks on the model. Okay, and I think we can increase the tiling quite a bit. Reduce the blur and tile at 3 by 3. Okay, let's reduce the bump to 5 and check again. Okay, 5 may be a bit low. Let's try it at 10. Okay, that's better. And I also want some sort of a noise mixed with this bitmap. I want to create a more interesting bump map. So let's add some noise by creating a mix right here. That's going to be our color 1, and attach the noise to color 2. And I'm going to go with some regular fractal noise. Let's preview that. Much too large. Let's try 10 times smaller. Okay, great. And let's mix them together at 50% for now. Okay, let's bring up the bump value a bit and test it out. Nice rough looking paint, I think. Maybe the noise size could be reduced a bit further to like 0.2. I'm also going to reduce levels to 2. So it's not as rough anymore. Okay, I think it's perfect. So we have our paint layer ready. Let's make a copy of that and okay, let's lay out those children. And create a copy. Okay. And I'm gonna also copy my composite map, just Ctrl-Shift-Drag to make a copy, and disconnect the original from the diffuse map. And for the second layer, I'm gonna change the color a bit. I'm gonna go to my colors and change them to... Okay, let's try this dark red. Some black spots. And also let's mess up the bitmap a bit so the spots are not in the same place. Okay, great. So that's our second paint layer. So let's put these 3 layers together in a V-Ray blend material. So in this case, I think it's gonna be a bit easier to reverse the order of the layers. So instead of beginning with the wood, we're gonna begin with this yellow paint, then move on to the red paint and finish it up with the wood layer. And the reason for this is that it's easier to add some smaller patches on the base layer than add some huge patches on the base layer where only tiny spots of the base are visible. It's just easier to understand it if you do it the other way around. So lay on some smaller and smaller details on top of each other. So start with the V-Ray blend material, and as the first layer we're going to use the largest area, which is this yellow color. Okay, let's add the red coat next and see how that looks. Okay, now we need to create a mask, and I think we can use a bitmap, which is something like this Dirt 21. Okay, to see it on our model, we first are going to assign the material and then render it out. I think the patches are kind of okay, but they are smallish. I want them to be a bit larger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the texture in Photoshop. So that's Dirt 21. And just do a level and just adjust the levels of the image. Let's drag that midpoint towards the left. Okay, like that. And I'm gonna resave it as Dirt 21 large, just in case we might need the original later. Okay, so back to Max and swap out that texture for this modified version. And that's looking quite a bit better. So what I want to do next is I want to add some sort of a scratch pattern to the edges of the object. And since this material has thick layers of paint on it, I'm probably gonna want to use that map for my bump as well. So in this case I'm not gonna use V-Ray Dirt, but I'm gonna use the tension modifier. So select your object and assign the tension modifier. Again, the reason for this is that V-Ray Dirt does not work with bump, but the tension modifier does. Okay, a little problem. So for the tension modifier to work correctly, sometimes it's necessary to add some additional geometry to the object. So for example, these areas were very stretched out. So if you connect them, you're gonna add some more vertices, and the modifier will have more vertices to apply the colors to. Okay, and now it should look a bit better. Alright, perfect. Okay, so edges, edges, edges. Let's increase the contrast a bit. And let's increase the scale as well. So this looks somewhat okay. Just play around with the settings, and I think I like this result. Okay, great. So we're gonna use this to add some detail to those areas that are green in the viewport. So basically I'm gonna create a composite map. Okay, leave that bitmap as my first layer and create a new layer, which is going to be basic white for now. And to assign a color, just use V-Ray color map and set it to white. Okay. And in this mask slot, I'm going to use my vertex color. Okay, set that to the green channel. And once you preview the map, you can see the effect pretty cleanly. So I think what I want to do is I want to increase the contrast of my vertex color. So I'm going to run it through an output map. So right now it looks like this. But if I go to my output map and adjust the levels, I can make those whites stronger. Right, I think that's gonna be fine. So we have that vertex color, and this is how the composite looks. And notice that those white areas along the edges are very, very smooth and very perfect. And we want to make them a bit more interesting, so I'm gonna run this vertex color through a mix map. Use it as the mix amount. And change that white color to an interesting bitmap, like maybe, I don't know, dirt 13. So let's see how that dirt 13 looks on the model. And let's bump up the tiling a bit. Also gonna reduce the blur. Okay, so this is how our vertex color looks right now. I noticed that it's quite a bit more interesting than before. And finally, I want to run this whole thing through an output map again, just to bump up the contrast. Okay, right here. And again assign 2 points and make those whites stronger. And you can see some damage around the edges now. Maybe it's not as strong as I would like it to be. So let's try to increase the convex scale to maybe 3 and try again. And that makes this effect stronger. Alright. It would be probably easier to just use Vray Dirt here, but since it doesn't work with bump, I'm gonna avoid that. Okay, so lay out those children nodes, and also want to use this final composite map in the bump slot of this red paint material. So this is the bump slot. First of all, I'm going to create a composite map here. Okay. Leave that original bump as my layer 1. Bring it down here. Okay, so this is my original bump, and I'm gonna add another layer with the bump from this mask. Okay, sorry. So add another layer and drag that here. So since we want these white areas to go downwards instead of upwards, since the red paint is lower than the yellow paint, we need to invert this map. Okay, great. Now set that blending mode to darken and reduce the opacity. Now we should have a nice bump going on here. I'm going to create a larger render so you can see exactly what's happening here. Okay, let's make that a bit stronger. And finally, make the bump for the whole material a bit stronger. Right, and I think that looks good. So that's our red paint material assigned to the correct slot, and it has its mask ready. So let's just finish it up with this wood. So code 2. And what I want to do is I want to make a copy of this mask. So Control Shift and drag it up. And I want to make this mask a bit smaller in size. And to do that, okay, we can go ahead and go to our output first. And select our bitmap. In the first layer and change that from this large dirt to a smaller one. And let's use this as a mask for blend 2. Alright, I think that should work fine. Maybe let's adjust this output as well by moving the point slightly towards right. Okay, now you have some areas with that red paint which transition into wood. Maybe let's take that smaller map and adjust the midpoint slightly towards the other side to make that wood a bit less visible. Okay, maybe like that, and just resave. So let's see if that changed anything. And yeah, it looks a bit better now. Alright, so now you have your wood material ready. And if you want to change the colors, just go to those mix maps and change the colors to something more, to something you like a bit more. So let's try this avocado green and maybe gray instead of red. Okay, maybe let's take that wood and make it a bit brighter. And there's your adjusted material. Okay, maybe let's make that gray a bit brighter. It's too similar to the wood. Okay, that's better. So I'm pretty happy with this material, and I think we can call it finished. Okay, and that's the finished painted wood material.